Hello everybody, this is Steve Yoder. It is Monday, January 28, 2019, and I have just learned that we will not be having class on Tuesday, January 29. During that class, we would have covered the internal strategic analysis for a company using primarily the structure used by Jim Collins. So in this video, I'm going to try to cover in a very accelerated way what we would have covered. There are many slides, but I'm not going to be talking about each slide. I would encourage you to have the actual printed slides in front of you as you are watching or listening to this. But let's go ahead and get started. Again, the goal is to look at Jim Collins's approach to strategic analysis. I like to think of strategic analysis as looking at the outside when you are looking at the environment, and then you gradually focus in from the outside and you look at the inside. You look at the people. Who are the actual people who are running the company, the actual traits and characteristics of the leader. They are very, very important, and as you would know if you read Good to Great, and as I hope to give you one clip at least of, Jim Collins believes that you have to have in the people who run your company disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action. Here is the format that we've used before to show you the strategic analysis process. We look at the external environment, the internal environment, set our mission, vision, formulate a strategy, and then implement the strategy. Today we're looking at the internal environment. Jim Collins is a prolific author. We're waiting for him to come out with another book. Here's a list of his books, and right now I'm going to attempt to show you the introductory clip from Jim Collins's video version of Good to Great.
Hi there, I'm Jim Collins, and I would like to start our sessions together with a challenge. A challenge I would like you to think about right up front. Good is the enemy of great. Good is the mortal, sworn, bitter enemy of great. And if you think about it, that's one of the key reasons why we have so few things in life that ever become truly great. We, by and large, do not have the opportunity to attend or to send our children to great schools. Why? Well, we have good schools. We, by and large, do not live under great government. Why? Well, we have good government, and it works pretty well. Most companies, most businesses will never become truly great, because most are really rather good. And therein lies the root of much of their main problem. And now as you think about heading out into the trajectory of your lives, I'd like you to think about this. The sad, horrifying truth is that most people will wake up at the end of their lives and have to accept the fact that they didn't have a great life because they traded off the opportunity for a great life by simply pursuing and settling for the good life. Good is the enemy of great. And we are going to be spending time talking in these sessions about the difference between great and good. This is not about business. This is not about corporations. This is not about management. This is about the difference between great companies and good companies, great organizations and good organizations, great management and good management, great nonprofits and good nonprofits, great lives and good lives. And I'm here to challenge you to think about what our research might mean to you as a person, in your work, in your social work, in any walk of life. Thinking constantly about what separates great from good, how good can become great, and how greatness can be sustained, how it can endure, so that it might be built to last.
So here's how Jim Collins came up with his determination of what companies became great as opposed to merely good. It was a bottoms-up research process. It was quantitative, not qualitative. And his three themes are here. Disciplined people, engaged in disciplined thought, taking disciplined actions. And as you can see, we'll be talking about all of those. He is a great believer that who is the CEO is very important, and he says that the great companies were led by great CEOs whom he called level 5 leaders. It's hard to be a great leader, and in fact we have seen a decrease in the number of years that someone stays in place as a CEO. The turnover is high. Hewlett-Packard's CEO lasted a fairly short period of time, but it was probably because he engaged in false expense reports. So what is it that strategic leaders actually do? It's not a black box that makes decisions about strategy. We now will look at the elements of what it takes to be a good strategic leader, and we'll take them in order. The first thing we do is determine what the strategic decision is. That's what we've started looking at. We do a mission statement and a vision statement. George H.W. Bush, who died in 2018, didn't really think too much of the process of visioning. I think that it actually is an important thing to look out and also to look out for problems. Activist shareholders can tell when there's not a good strategy in place, and beware if you're ever a CEO and your shareholders, whether you're a public shareholder or private, ask for a strategic analysis. It means that they don't think you're doing a good one. A good CEO will keep his or her ear to the ground, and that means getting out of the office, finding a way to listen. Don't take a job as a CEO because you want a big house or you want a big office. I am a great believer in this quote from the former president of the University of Southern California, who said this thing that I repeat often: being, and then fill in the blank, in this case president, is not the same as doing president. There's a lot of aggravation to put up, and it's a lot more than just having a nice wood-paneled office that makes you a president. So we have set the strategic direction. Now you got to get down to the hard stuff, managing the firm's internal resources. What does that mean? It means attracting the right intellectual capital, hiring the right people, and then figuring out how to exploit those the competencies of those people. Remember, our definition of strategy was an integrated and coordinated set of commitments and actions designed to exploit core competencies. That's core competencies of human beings, not of Excel spreadsheet. So the most important thing at the beginning is getting the right people on the bus. Let's take a look at what Collins says about this.
Disciplined people who engage in disciplined thought, who take disciplined action. We're now moving into the second part of the first stage. In disciplined people, there's the principle of first who and then what. In August of 1937, two individual entrepreneurs got together to form a company. They met in a garage, and they sat down and began talking about what the company could do. They brainstormed a range of possible ideas to get the company off the ground. They wrote a set of notes or minutes from that first meeting, and it said, we decided we wanted to form a company in the radio, electronics industry, broadly defined. It goes on and describes that they want to make their own stuff rather than sell other people's stuff. But there's a wonderful line. The question of what to manufacture and sell, however, was postponed. Thus is the beginning of one of the great entrepreneurial startups of all time. Bill Hewlett and David Packard, the founders of HP, didn't have a great idea for starting the company. In fact, they didn't have any idea. They considered electronic bowling alley sensors. They had an electronic shock jiggle machine to help overweight people lose weight. They had a clock drive for a telescope, none of which became great market hits. They tried a whole bunch of different things. They experimented with the possibility of doing medical devices, being careful to avoid what they called quackery. This is the antithesis of what you would learn about starting a company, where you got to have a great idea and a great market and a great refined advantage, and then you launch the company. They were like, we don't know what we're going to make. We're going to try a bunch of stuff and see what works. And yet that became the Hewlett-Packard Company. But what was really going on is that they had a truly great idea. And that idea was the idea of a company built by people who shared a particular set of values. The products, they could be any number of different things, but we had to have the right people. And in fact, the founding of the company really came from the fact that Bill Hewlett and David Packard were best friends. And the founding concept of the company was, let's do something together. That was it. That was the great idea. And then let's hire other people who are like us, who share our values and our standards, and let's build a company together. Instead of the, I have the great what, now I'll get the who's to take me there. Instead of being a genius with 1,000 helpers, I am a genius with a great idea and I'll get all these people to help me execute that idea. They had a whole different approach. We are going to bring together a group of people, and then as a group, as a collective genius, we will then come up with some ideas to get the company going. They understood instinctively from the beginning that truly great companies are built first and foremost not by knowing where you're going to go, not by having a direction for the bus, but by first get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus, and then figure out where to drive that bus. First who, then what? First who, then what? This is a key principle of building anything.
First who, then what? I think that's an extremely important concept here, one that might be easier said than done. You rarely can go in and not make any money while you're trying to hire the excellent people, but you can at least be treading water, if not more, while you are looking for the right people to get on your bus. There can be some problems when you get people around who are yes men, yes women, and don't tell the CEO what he or she needs to hear. This is what happened to Circuit City, for example. You could say it's what happened to Hillary Clinton's campaign. They didn't think that they could do anything wrong, and they were very dismissive of their competition. Here's the important slide, level 5 executive. Look, there are a lot of levels below that that still are perfectly good people, but it takes a very, very unique set of traits and characteristics to make you a level 5 executive. Strategic leader does have to look at the culture. This goes to the values that we talked about. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker, the very influential business consultant, said this a number of years ago. It is absolutely crucial. You could have the best business model in the world, but if there is not a sense of shared values that will help you sustain your mission and vision, you will fail. Collins says that when you are looking at culture, you must have an attitude of being realistic. You have to confront the brutal facts, number one, and you have to be willing and able to filter out most of the stimuli coming your way, and he calls that being a hedgehog. You have to be disciplined in the way you think about things, and then you have to be disciplined in the way you go about doing things. Let's take a look at what Colin.
Disciplined people who engage in disciplined thought, who take disciplined action. We're now moving into the second component of disciplined thought, the discipline to be a hedgehog, not a fox, the discipline to have a hedgehog concept rather than to just be a diversified fox. The notion of the hedgehog and the fox really ties back to a wonderful essay which was written by Isaiah Berlin, where he recounts an ancient parable of the hedgehog and the fox. And the idea is this, that the fox is a crafty creature. The fox knows many things and has many moving parts and pieces and very sophisticated plans. And well, the hedgehog, on the other hand, the hedgehog is a much simpler creature. The hedgehog knows one big thing. And the parable is that the hedgehog tends to win. And Berlin points out that basically that's a parable about thinking, that there are really two types of thinkers. There are the foxes who see all the complexity in things, the foxes who love all the moving pieces and make things more complicated than they need to be, or even embrace all the complexity that is really there. Whereas the hedgehog, on the other hand, takes all that complexity and simplifies it down to one big idea. Now, it might be a relatively simple idea, but it is one big idea. When Freud came along and said, the big idea is that there is an unconscious, and the unconscious is a big explanatory variable about why people do things. Now, there's a lot of complexity underneath that, but that is the big hedgehog idea. And what Berlin pointed out is the best thinkers move through the complexity to eventually gain simplicity to explain the complexity. We found the leaders in Good to Great to be more hedgehog than fox. There's a wonderful line where they discuss, I believe it was Carl Reichert of Wells Fargo. And the quote went something like, if Carl were an Olympic diver, he would not do a 5-flip twisty sort of complicated thing. He would do the best swan dive in the world. And he would just do it over and over and over again. Hedgehog, not fox. Disciplined thought. Disciplined people engaging in discipline.
Disciplined thought. What does that mean? What do we mean by being willing and able to confront the brutal facts? Kimberly Clark did this when this man, Darwin Smith, took over as CEO of the company. It was a forest products company that owned a lot of forests. He sold all the forests and focused on the brand names, which of course included Kleenex and Huggies. Here are some other brutal facts that need to be faced. The United States Postal Service confronting the brutal fact that FedEx and UPS are firmly in their territory, and I just saw an Amazon truck. Amazon is in their territory as well. IBM has had to confront the brutal facts several times. We've talked about this, first with typewriters, then with personal computers. Polaroid, instant cameras, we do it on our phones, and we talked about BlackBerry last week. Jamie Dimon, highly successful CEO of JP Morgan Chase, confronted the brutal facts of the 2008-2009 financial downturn. He just threw their strategic plan out the window. America perhaps needs to be a hedgehog. Under Obama, there were people who thought he was too much of a fox. You might argue that perhaps Trump, with his emphasis on America Great Again, is a hedgehog. Same criticism was made of Microsoft. Things have turned around at Microsoft. They're less trying to be all things to all people now under the new CEO. Talked about that before. Let's move on to another, perhaps less glamorous side of being a good strategic leader. Once you've set the strategy and you've gotten the right people on the bus and you're going to have the right culture, including being disciplined, being a disciplined hedgehog, you have to have internal controls to make sure that things don't fall apart. Having good controls still means you have to have the right people. People should be given responsibilities, not jobs. Here, this is sometimes a tough concept to grasp. If you take away all autonomy, people lose the desire to work, and you're going to lose the best possible people. If you give them too much autonomy, human nature takes place or takes over, and mistakes can be made. Self-interest can become the most important. What's the role of technology in an internal culture? Collins would say that it should be a follower and not a leader. You shouldn't adopt and use technology just for the sake of being new and up to date. What Collins really believes is most important, though, is this concept of a flywheel. Let's listen to what he says there.
So we found over and over again that there was no miracle moment, no one instantaneous breakthrough, no one big push, no one killer innovation. In fact, it felt different. It felt more like pushing a giant, heavy flywheel. And I'd like you to picture some monstrous piece of metal, some huge flywheel the size of a city block. And you go out and you start pushing and pushing and pushing as hard as you can, and after a lot of effort, you eventually get one giant, slow, creaky turn. But you don't stop. You keep pushing in an intelligent and consistent direction, and you push, and after a while you get a second turn. And you don't stop. Disciplined people engaging in disciplined thought and taking disciplined action, you keep pushing in an intelligent, consistent direction, consistent with your hedgehog concept. And you eventually get 4 turns, and you don't stop. Disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, consistent with your hedgehog concept, you get 8 turns. And disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, 16, 32, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. And eventually that flywheel is just flying around with big, huge, unstoppable momentum. Whoosh! And somebody comes in and says, so tell me, what was the one big push that made it go? It's a nonsense question. Yes, there were some big pushes, but it is push upon push, turn upon turn, day upon day, year upon year that produces that combined cumulative momentum in the flywheel. This is how greatness really happens. Think about Sam Walton. In 1945, a young Sam Walton begins building what became Walmart with a single dime store. One single dime store in a small town. 7 years later, not 7 months, not 7 weeks, 7 years later, Sam Walton has a second dime store. 7 years to go to dime store number 2. 25 years, a quarter of a century into Walmart's history. They only have 38 stores. 25 years. This is the flywheel, and yet today, by the time we're recording this, Walmart is now on its way to potentially being the world's first $1 trillion per year revenue corporation. It has annual revenues that exceed the GDP of quite a number of nations. But it all began with one dime store. Push upon push and turn upon turn, and one dime store to 2, and 2 dime stores to 4, and 4 to 8 to 16 to 32, and you hit that 38, 25 years in, and you don't stop, and you keep pushing, consistent with that hedgehog concept. And that is the story of how Walmart really happened. Sam Walton himself said, people think that Walmart was some great idea that I just had, I woke up with in the middle of the night, in middle age, but in fact it was simply one more step of many steps that were about 25 years in the making. This is the flywheel.
Okay, so it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while to get going. Look at Google, for example. It took them years to build that algorithm, but boy, is that flywheel working at Google. And at Walmart, even though they're probably way past $1 trillion in sales now. Then finally, underlying everything, there have to be ethics. There has to be a good tone of ethics at the top and all the way down the company for making good ethical decisions. The CEO has to set the tone, has to set the goals at the top. Yes, you have to have a good code of conduct. You have to have a good working environment where everybody is treated with dignity. If people feel they're not being treated with dignity, they're going to feel free to treat others in a disrespectful way and to make bad ethical decisions. We talked about the values at Regions. Here they are, and I think that company has really done very well. Business-wise, everybody knows the values. We heard Tyler Peterson tell us that a few weeks ago. Big problems at Wells Fargo, where clearly, even if they had something like this as their values, and I'll bet they did, they weren't following them. They have to be carried out, they have to be observed, they have to be repeated. Collins had some surprising findings when it came to core values, and that was that there was no one set of core values that worked for every company that became great. We do know that bad companies ignored core values. We shouldn't be confusing temporary things as core values. Preserving Social Security is somewhat temporal, somewhat fleeting, somewhat temporary. So, in summary, good to great. We have disciplined people on the bus thinking in a disciplined way and taking disciplined action. And your team papers should be reflecting whether or not you see these concepts at work. FYI, Collins has gone on to do some additional research. He has written a book called How the Mighty Fall, explaining how many of the companies, unfortunately, that were once great have fallen. And here are the reasons that he found for companies like Circuit City and Rubbermaid and Zenith falling after once being great. They had hubris. We talked about that before. They weren't confronting the brutal facts. They were denying risks. And when it finally became apparent what was happening, they were too late. Not everybody is a big fan of Jim Collins. Here's someone, Phil Rosenzweig, who says that there might be some flaws in the analysis of Collins. Stop, pause, take a look at that. Not everybody believes that we should be focusing so much on the innate traits and characteristics of the level 5 leader. As a matter of fact, leadership studies has gone beyond just what the leader is like himself or herself. Early studies in leadership did focus on the great man theory, and I'll let you decide whether or how Donald Trump will come out under that analysis. Some people actually think that a narcissist makes for a good leader. And we often fall for charismatic narcissists, as this Harvard Business Review article said. So recap: disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined actions. This is where you might put the need for disciplined people in the study and building of a good internal environment. I think if you're thinking about disciplined thought, it would be here with strategy formulation. And I think when you're taking disciplined action, the place to put that would be in how you implement your strategy. Reminder, by this Friday at 12 noon, the presenting team for Bear Electric, now going by Mayor, should be submitting its team paper. That's Friday noon at 12 o'clock. All other students should be submitting their individual memoranda themselves. Again, the way to remember when your assignments are due in this class is to use the calendar feature, and you can also use the syllabus. I hope everybody stays safe in the snowstorm that we're expecting for tomorrow, Tuesday, the 29th.